My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 31 years old. The night I told my family I was 12 weeks pregnant, my own mother punched me in the stomach because she said my sister was supposed to have the first baby. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and the woman standing outside had my face. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. If you'd met my mother first, you probably would have liked her. Most people did. She owned one of the most successful formal dress boutiques in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She had a gift for making women feel beautiful. At least, most women. Growing up, every Saturday morning started the same way. My sister Megan and I would come downstairs for breakfast, and my mother would already be standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking us over before saying a single word. Her eyes always landed on Megan first. "Oh, honey, tuck your hair behind your ear. Stand up straight. That color really brings out your eyes." Then she'd glance at me. Just one quick look. "Morning." That was usually enough. As a kid, I thought I was lucky. No one criticized my clothes or my hair. I thought I'd escaped the pressure Megan lived under. Years later, I realized I hadn't escaped anything. I simply wasn't being considered. Every Monday morning, my mother kept a blue measuring tape in the kitchen drawer. Before Megan left for school, she'd measure her waist, write the number in a notebook, and remind her to stay camera ready. I used to wait for my turn. It never came. You don't measure something you've already decided isn't worth displaying. My mother often said, "Beauty opens every door." Customers smiled when she said it. Inside our house, it wasn't a saying. It was a rule. Megan became the face of the boutique before she was old enough to understand it. She modeled flower girl dresses, then prom gowns, and eventually her photos covered the walls of the store. Customers recognized her everywhere. I worked there too, just never out front. I unpacked boxes, steamed dresses, and cleaned fitting rooms. The back room became my place. One afternoon, when I was 9, I overheard a customer telling my mother, "Your daughter is absolutely gorgeous." Mom smiled. "You have to work for beauty." Then she added, "Beauty opens every door." Everyone laughed. Standing behind a rack of dresses, I remember realizing she wasn't talking about me. People think favoritism is obvious. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just hundreds of tiny moments that all point in the same direction until you stop expecting your turn. My dad, Robert, worked as a laboratory technician and usually volunteered for evening shifts. He loved us quietly. He fixed my bike. He remembered my favorite muffins. But whenever Mom became difficult, he'd suddenly find a reason to leave the room. He wasn't cruel. He just never stood between us. By middle school, I'd become an expert at reading my mother's moods. The way she held her coffee mug, the way she smiled. Those instincts later made me good at my job as a radiographer. At work, they helped patients. At home, they only helped me stay out of the way. Still, one question never left me. Megan looked like both of my parents. I didn't. Even relatives occasionally pointed it out. When I was about 10, I finally asked, "Mom, why don't I look like everyone else?" She kept adjusting a dress before looking at me. Not angry, just distant. Then she said, "That's not from my side of the family." I watched my inbox fill up with cruise confirmations, boarding documents, and reservation emails until everything started to blur together. If this trip happened at all, it was because I made it happen. I checked passports, printed luggage tags, compared flight times, booked transportation to the port, and even reminded everyone to complete their online check-in. Mom would text me things like, "Can you make sure my cabin is close to your father's?" Megan wanted to know the dress code for dinner. Dad forgot his passport expiration date. I answered every question. Nobody even asked how much time it had taken. I told myself that was just how families worked. Someone naturally became the organizer. Apparently, that someone was me. Daniel noticed before anyone else did. "You've been staring at your laptop for 2 hours," he said, setting a cup of tea beside me. "I'm almost done." "You've been saying that since lunch," I laughed. "I just want everything to go smoothly." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "You know, If something goes wrong, the cruise will still leave. Exactly. That's why nothing can go wrong. He smiled and shook his head. You're impossible. Maybe I was, but I also knew that if I forgot one document, somehow it would become my fault. A few days later, we all met at my parents' house to go over the final plans. Mom barely looked at the paperwork I'd prepared. I knew you'd handle it. It sounded like a compliment. For some reason, it didn't feel like one. Dad thanked me, then immediately started asking whether the parking garage near the airport was covered. Megan scrolled through vacation outfits on her phone while I explained the boarding schedule. Nobody interrupted, nobody complained. They just expected me to keep talking until every problem disappeared. Halfway through dinner, Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen for less than a second. I'll be right back. He walked onto the back patio and quietly closed the sliding door behind him. I didn't think much of it. Everyone gets work calls. When he came back a few minutes later, he smiled like nothing had happened. What did I miss? Mom answered before I could. Nothing important. The conversation picked up again. Still, something about the timing felt strange. The next afternoon, Thomas and I were shopping for sunscreen and a few last-minute things. His phone rang again. This time, he didn't even check who was calling. He just looked at me. I need to take this. You've been popular lately. It's work. Everything okay? Yeah. His answer came a little too quickly. He stepped outside the store. Through the glass, I watched him pacing across the sidewalk while speaking in a low voice. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. When he came back, I asked if everything was all right. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Just some loose ends. What kind of loose ends? They'll be taken care of. That was the end of the conversation. I could have pushed. Instead, I let it go. We all have stressful weeks. That's what I kept telling myself. If you've ever had a moment where everyone around you acted completely normal, but something still felt off, let me know in the comments. Sometimes your instincts notice things long before your mind catches up. Over the next few days, little moments kept piling up. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. Mom and Megan exchanged quick looks I couldn't quite read. Dad seemed unusually quiet. Even Daniel mentioned it one evening. Your family's acting different. You noticed too? I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. So it's not just me. He hesitated. Maybe they're planning some surprise for the trip. I wanted to believe that. It sounded reasonable. Still, surprises usually came with excitement. This felt heavier. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, I was finishing the online boarding forms when my phone vibrated. The message was from Patricia. She almost never texted me directly. I opened it without thinking. Lauren, we need to talk before the cruise. Please don't tell anyone I contacted you. My fingers froze above the screen. I read Patricia's message 3 times before I answered. What are you talking about? The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. A minute later, my phone rang. I answered immediately. Patricia? Her voice was quiet. Nathan, I don't know how to tell you this. My stomach tightened. Just tell me. She took a breath. I thought you already knew. Knew what? There isn't a cabin for you anymore. I actually laughed. What? They reassigned it. That's not funny? I'm not joking. I stood up so fast, my chair scraped across the floor. What do you mean they reassigned it? I heard your parents talking yesterday. Nicole is taking your place. For a few seconds, I couldn't say anything. There has to be some mistake. I hope there is. But that's what they said. We hung up a minute later. I immediately opened the cruise booking. Everything looked the same. My confirmation email was still there. Nothing had changed online, which somehow made Patricia's words feel even more impossible. I called Mom first. She didn't answer. I called Dad, straight to voicemail. I tried Megan. She picked up on the 4th ring. Hey, Megan, Patricia just told me my cabin was given to Nicole. Silence. A long one. Finally, she sighed. You should talk to Mom. So it's true? I didn't say that. Then tell me it's not. I really can't. My chest felt tight. You knew? Lauren, please don't do this over the phone. How long have you known? Another pause. I have to go. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, not angry, and not yet, mostly confused. I called Brandon next. He answered almost immediately. Hey, what's up? Did you know about this? His voice changed before he even asked what I meant. Patricia called you? So you did know? I wasn't supposed to say anything. Brandon. He let out a slow breath. I'm sorry. Can somebody explain why my vacation suddenly belongs to Nicole? I honestly don't know all the details. Then tell me what you do know. I know Mom and Dad made the decision, and everyone just accepted it. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. I don't want to get in the middle of this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I'm in the middle by myself? It isn't like that. It feels exactly like that. He stayed quiet. I wish I could help, he finally said. But this came from Mom and Dad. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Not because it explained anything, because it sounded like everyone had already accepted it, including him. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. Daniel found me sitting at the dining table, still holding my phone. You look pale. I handed him the screen with Patricia's message. He read it twice. What is this? I don't even know. He frowned. Did anyone deny it? No. They just avoided answering. He pulled out the chair beside me. Lauren, this doesn't make any sense. I know. You paid for this trip. I organized the whole thing. And now nobody will tell you what's happening? I shook my head. For the first time since all of this started, I felt something heavier than confusion. It wasn't just about the cruise anymore. It was the realization that every person I trusted seemed to know something I didn't, and every phone call left me standing a little more alone. I looked at the clock. There was one place I could go without asking permission. The house. The one I'd helped buy. I still had clothes there, a few family photo albums, and some boxes I'd never moved out. If nobody wanted to answer my questions over the phone, maybe I'd find someone willing to answer them face to face. I grabbed my keys and headed for the front door. I pulled into the driveway, expecting the front door to unlock the way it always had. I entered the security code. The keypad beeped. Access denied. I frowned and tried again. Same result. I looked at the numbers to make sure I hadn't mistyped them. No. It was the same code I'd been using for years. I tried one more time. Nothing. For a second, I actually wondered if the batteries had died. I knocked. No answer. I rang the doorbell. Still nothing. The house looked occupied. My father's car was gone, but my mother's SUV was parked in the driveway. I called Mom again. Straight to voicemail. Dad. Nothing. Megan. Ignored. I stood on the front porch with my phone in my hand, feeling more embarrassed by the minute. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Collins, stepped outside to water her flowers. She smiled when she saw me. Lauren, I thought you were already on vacation. Not yet, I forced a smile. I think my door code isn't working. Oh. She glanced toward the house. I saw your parents leave earlier. Have you happened to see anyone come back? She shook her head. No, dear. I hesitated before asking the question. Would you mind trying to call my mom? Maybe she'll answer someone else. Of course, she dialed. We both waited. Voicemail. She tried my father. The same result. Mrs. Collins looked genuinely confused. That's strange. Yeah. I hope everything's okay. So do I. I thanked her and walked back across the driveway, wishing the ground would open beneath me. I'd bought this house, not completely on my own, but I'd covered the down payment when my parents were struggling after Dad retired. Mom had cried when we signed the paperwork. She hugged me and said, "This will always be your home." Standing outside, locked out by a code that no longer worked, those words felt strangely distant. About 20 minutes later, my phone finally rang. It was Dad. I heard you stop by. I couldn't get inside. We changed the code. I noticed. I forgot to tell you. Forgot. That word landed harder than it should have. Can you tell me the new one? A pause. We're not home. I know. So, can I have the code? Another silence. Finally, he said, I'll unlock it remotely. The lock clicked less than a minute later. He never gave me the numbers. I stepped inside. Everything looked normal. The family photos were still on the wall. Mom's favorite candles still sat on the entry table. The house even smelled the same. Yet something felt different. I walked upstairs toward the guest room where I'd been keeping a few things since Daniel and I renovated our apartment. The closet door was already open. Inside were 4 cardboard boxes, each one neatly sealed with packing tape. Across the top of the first box, written in black marker, were 2 words: Lauren, personal. I stared at them. Every shelf was empty. The drawers had been cleared out. Even the framed picture of Daniel and me was wrapped in newspaper and placed inside one of the boxes. Nobody had mentioned packing my things. Nobody had asked. It looked less like someone had helped me organize. It looked like someone had finished removing me. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, trying to remember if anyone had ever truly seen this place as partly mine, or if I'd simply believed it because I'd wanted to. If you've ever done everything you could for people you loved, only to feel like an outsider anyway, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing a place. It's realizing how quietly it happened. I carried the smallest box downstairs. Most of it was paperwork, tax records, insurance documents, old folders I'd left in Dad's office because he had the filing cabinet. I walked into the study to collect the rest. That was when something caught my eye. Tucked beneath the desk, half hidden behind a cabinet, sat a small black safe. I stopped. I'd been in this room hundreds of times, and I was certain I'd never seen that safe before. I crouched in front of the safe and stared at it for a few seconds. It wasn't large, just a black metal box tucked beneath Dad's desk, almost hidden behind the filing cabinet. I was sure it hadn't always been there. At least, I'd never noticed it. My first thought was simple: the house documents. Maybe that's why they'd packed my things so quickly. Maybe all the important paperwork had been locked away. Dad had always been careful with legal documents. I checked the handle, locked. Then I looked around the desk. His habits hadn't changed much over the years. He never remembered where he left his reading glasses, but he always hid spare keys in predictable places. Inside the top drawer, beneath an old notepad, was a small envelope, 1 key, no label. I hesitated. For a moment, I almost put it back. Then I remembered standing outside the front door while my own family ignored my calls. Whatever privacy they thought they had left with me, it already felt broken. The key fit. The lock clicked open. Inside wasn't what I expected. No property deed, no insurance folder, no will. Instead, the safe was packed with thick folders, bank statements, loan agreements, and envelopes stuffed with financial records. I pulled out the first stack: monthly statements, credit cards with balances far higher than I'd ever imagined. Another folder contained overdue notices. Not just one, several. Some had bright red stamps across the front. Past due. I frowned. Mom and Dad had always acted like money wasn't a problem. Not wealthy, just comfortable. Dad talked about retirement like it had all been carefully planned. Mom still bought expensive clothes for every holiday gathering. None of this matched the picture I'd been shown. I opened another folder. This one contained loan contracts, different banks, different dates. Some had already been paid off. Others had been refinanced. I kept flipping through the pages. The dates caught my attention. One contract was signed almost 4 years before I'd helped them buy this house. Another was even older. That stopped me. I'd always believed helping with the down payment had been the first time they needed serious financial support. Mom had said business had slowed. Dad had just retired. Everything had sounded temporary. But these papers told a different story. Whatever financial trouble they were in, it hadn't started with retirement. It had been going on for years. How had nobody mentioned it? Or had they simply decided I didn't need to know? I sat back in Dad's chair and spread several documents across the desk. The numbers kept getting larger. Refinanced debt, personal loans, transfers between accounts. Some pages had handwritten notes in Dad's handwriting. Others were signed only by Mom. Nothing explained why they had suddenly pushed me away. But it did explain one thing. The family I trusted with everything had been keeping far more secrets than I ever imagined. Daniel called while I was still reading. Are you okay? I honestly don't know. Are you still at the house? Yeah. What happened? I looked down at the papers covering the desk. I think Mom and Dad have been hiding financial problems for years. He was quiet for a second. Do they know you found all of that? I don't think so. Lauren, be careful. I just want answers. I know. But answers have a way of creating more questions. He wasn't wrong. I kept sorting through the paperwork anyway. One folder was noticeably thinner than the others. Inside was a single statement clipped to a payment summary. At first, I almost skipped it. Then I noticed the account number. It looked familiar. Too familiar. I read it again. My heartbeat slowed. I didn't recognize every digit, but I recognized the last 4 immediately. Years ago, before I changed banks, that had been my checking account. The payment summary showed a transfer for a large amount of money. And according to the document, it had come directly from that account. I spread the documents across the desk and grabbed a notebook from the drawer. I needed to stop reacting. That was the only way I could think clearly. I wrote down the dates first: old loans, payments, transfers, anything that connected one thing to another. At first, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Dad had borrowed money for the business. Maybe Mom had expenses she didn't want to worry me about. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions because I was hurt. So I kept going. I looked at every document like I was reviewing a patient's medical chart. No assumptions, just facts. That was something my job had taught me. Emotions could make you miss important details. The first thing I noticed was the timeline. The house payment I helped with wasn't the beginning. It was just one part of a much bigger pattern. There were loans before that, credit lines before that, money moving between accounts months before anyone ever told me they were struggling. Then I found something that made me stop, a transfer request. The date was familiar. I remembered that month. Mom had called me late at night. She sounded stressed. Lauren, I hate asking you this, but something came up. Something came up. That was the phrase she always used. Not an emergency, not a problem. Just something that came up. I had sent money without asking too many questions. Because she was my mother. Because I trusted her. Because I never thought I needed a reason to help my own family. I looked at the transfer record again. Then I looked at another document, a large payment made 2 days later. A payment that wasn't for a medical bill, wasn't for a house repair, wasn't anything urgent. It was a luxury purchase. I stared at the page. Maybe it was a coincidence. So I checked another one. Another emergency request. Another large transfer from me. Another major expense shortly afterward. My hands stopped moving. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I just felt tired. Because the hardest part wasn't the money. It was realizing that every time they asked, I had given them the benefit of the doubt. And maybe they had counted on that. I leaned back in the chair. The room suddenly felt smaller. I thought about all those times Mom said she hated putting pressure on me. All those times Dad said he'd pay me back when things improved. All those times I told them it wasn't necessary. I had spent years convincing myself that helping them was something I wanted to do. Now I wasn't sure if I had been helping or being used. My phone rang. For a second, I thought it was Mom. It wasn't. It was Thomas. I watched the screen light up. I let it ring. A minute later, a message appeared. Can we talk? I stared at it. Normally, I would have answered immediately. I would have asked if everything was okay. I would have tried to fix whatever problem existed. But this time, I put the phone face down. That small decision felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Like I was breaking a habit I didn't know I had. I kept organizing the papers. There was still so much I didn't understand. And I didn't want to walk into another conversation without knowing what I was talking about. People can forgive mistakes. They can forgive financial problems. But being left out of the truth for years is different. It changes how you hear every explanation afterward. I was sorting through the last folder when my phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. The name on the screen made me freeze. Nicole. She had never called me directly before. Not like this. Not without Mom or Megan being involved. I almost ignored it. Then another message appeared. Lauren, please answer. I need to explain something before you hear it from someone else. I stared at those words. Before I heard it from someone else. That wasn't a normal message. That was the kind of message people sent when they knew something was coming. I stared at Nicole's message for almost a full minute before I replied. Where are you? The answer came quickly. Coffee shop near the mall. I can meet you if you're willing. Normally, I would have ignored it. A part of me still wanted to believe Nicole was the reason all of this happened. She was the one taking my cabin. She was the one going on the trip while I was being pushed aside. But something about her message bothered me. She didn't sound like someone who had won. She sounded nervous. I drove there without telling anyone. When I walked in, Nicole was sitting near the window with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She stood when she saw me. Lauren. I didn't sit down immediately. Why did you want to talk? Her expression changed, not offended, just uncomfortable. I guess you probably hate me right now. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. She nodded slowly. That's fair. I sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my head. Did you know you were taking my cabin? Nicole looked confused. Your cabin? Yes. She looked down. Lauren, I didn't know it was yours. That wasn't the answer I expected. What do you mean? My mom called me and said there was an extra cabin available. She said the family wanted me to join the trip. Extra cabin? Nicole shook her head. I didn't know there was supposed to be someone else. I studied her face. I was looking for a sign she was lying. I couldn't find one. So when did you find out? 2 days ago. The same time everything started falling apart. What did they tell you? Not much. She looked away. They just said plans changed. I leaned back. So you didn't ask why? I did. And? Nicole gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. You know your family better than I do. And that answer was strangely familiar. Everyone seemed to have learned the same way to avoid questions. I thought you were replacing me, I admitted. Nicole looked surprised. I would never intentionally do that. I didn't know what else to think. I understand. The conversation felt strange. A few hours ago, I had imagined this woman as the person who had taken something from me. Now she looked just as confused as I felt. Nicole stirred her coffee. There is something else you should know. I looked up. What? I saw Thomas with documents. My attention immediately changed. What kind of documents? I'm not sure. When? A few weeks ago. She hesitated. He was at your parents' house. I stopped by to drop something off. What did you see? He was carrying a folder. It wasn't the same paperwork they usually keep in the office. Where did he take it? Nicole frowned, trying to remember. I don't know exactly. Somewhere else in the house. Another room? She nodded. I think so. I felt my stomach tighten. Did you see anything written on it? No. She looked at me carefully. But he seemed nervous. Nervous how? Like he didn't want anyone to notice he had it. I looked down at the table. Another folder. Another place. Another thing nobody had mentioned. Nicole reached across slightly. Lauren, I know this probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but I'm sorry. I looked at her. For what? For being part of something that hurt you. Her answer caught me off guard, because it was the first apology I'd heard from anyone. Not an explanation, not a reason, just an apology. I nodded. Thank you. We sat quietly for a moment. The anger I had carried toward her wasn't completely gone, but it wasn't where it had been. She wasn't the person who locked me out. She wasn't the person who moved my things into boxes. She was just another person who had been handed a piece of a story and expected not to ask questions. Before we left, Nicole stopped me. Lauren? Yeah? If you find out what they're hiding, she paused. Be careful how you approach them. I looked at her. Why? Because whatever it is, they worked hard to keep it hidden. That sentence stayed with me. I went back to my car and sat there for a few minutes. I didn't call Mom. I didn't call Dad. For once, I didn't rush to confront anyone. I had learned something important. Every time I asked a question, someone gave me only the part they wanted me to know, so I needed the rest. I drove back to the house. The study was exactly how I left it. The papers were still on the desk. The safe was still open. But now I wasn't looking for answers in the documents I had already found. I was looking for the ones someone had tried to hide. Nicole had mentioned another folder, another place. I stood in the middle of the room, looking around. Then my eyes moved toward the old cabinet near the wall, a place I had never bothered checking before. I opened the cabinet slowly. For a second, I expected nothing. Maybe I was searching for something that wasn't there. Maybe Nicole had remembered wrong. But behind a row of old folders and photo albums, I found another stack of papers. Not hidden exactly, just placed somewhere nobody would normally look. I pulled them out and carried them back to the desk. The first folder was filled with bank statements. Again, more dates, more transactions, more pieces of a story that somehow still felt incomplete. I grabbed my notebook and started writing everything down, not because I wanted to prove my family was guilty. I needed to understand that difference mattered. I went through the records 1 year at a time, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever there was a crisis, whenever mom called saying they were in trouble, whenever dad said things were a little tight, there was always something else happening around the same time. A large purchase, a payment to another account, an expense that had nothing to do with an emergency. I stopped reading for a moment. The hardest part wasn't discovering they had money problems. People struggle. Families fall into debt. That happens. The hardest part was realizing I had been given only the version of the story that made me open my wallet. I thought about every conversation, every phone call, every time I heard my mother's worried voice. Lauren, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. That sentence used to make me feel trusted. Now it made me wonder how many times I'd heard it before. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Any answers? I looked at the desk covered in paperwork. I typed back. Some, but not the ones I wanted. A few seconds later, he called. You've been there for hours. I know. Lauren, you don't have to figure everything out tonight. I think I do. Why? I looked at the documents. Because if I don't, someone else will tell me what happened. And I don't think I can believe everything they say anymore. He was quiet. Not because he disagreed, because he understood. That was the thing about Daniel. He didn't try to convince me my family was bad. He didn't tell me what to think. He just let me see what was in front of me. I continued sorting. Some records went back almost a decade. Years before the house. Years before the cruise. Years before I ever questioned anything. The problems weren't new. They had simply been carefully managed or hidden. I found payments from accounts I recognized, accounts I had helped with, accounts where I had transferred money when someone said they were desperate. I closed my eyes. I remembered being younger and thinking helping my parents meant I was becoming a good daughter. I never considered asking why I was always the one they came to, why Megan was never involved, why nobody else seemed to carry that responsibility. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me. I had spent years feeling guilty for saying no. Guilty for having boundaries. Guilty for wondering if I was doing enough. But sitting there, surrounded by documents they never wanted me to see, I realized something. Helping someone doesn't mean giving them permission to hide the truth from you. I wrote one sentence in my notebook. Stop apologizing for asking questions. It looked simple, but it felt like the first honest thing I'd written all day. I kept going. Near the bottom of the stack was a folder that looked different, thicker, newer. The papers inside weren't old bank statements. They were copies, agreements, notes, documents that had been collected recently. I checked the dates. Most of them were from the last few months. Around the same time, the cruise was planned. My focus changed immediately. Why would they need new financial arrangements right before a family vacation? I flipped through the pages carefully. There were references to accounts, property, payments, names I recognized, but not everything connected, not yet. Then I found one page folded inside the folder. No bank logo, no official heading, just a handwritten note attached to a printed document. I read the first line. Then I stopped. Because it mentioned something I had never heard about, something that explained why my family had been acting differently, but only if I understood what the document was actually referring to. Thomas looked at me like he was trying to figure out when everything had changed. Not the room, not the documents, me. The cruise had ended 3 days earlier, and somehow everyone acted like we could return to normal. Mom called me on Sunday morning. "Lauren, can you help me with something at the boutique?" The old version of me would have already been grabbing my keys. I would have asked what she needed. I would have rearranged my schedule. Instead, I looked at the phone for a moment and answered calmly. "What do you need?" There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for her to notice my tone was different. "I need you to stop by. There are some invoices I need organized." "I can't today." Another pause. "You're busy?" "Yes." She didn't ask what I was doing. She didn't ask if everything was okay. She just said, "All right." That was it. A few months ago, that conversation would have bothered me for hours. I would have wondered if I sounded selfish, if I had disappointed her. But this time, I put my phone down and continued making breakfast. Daniel noticed. That was different. What was? "You didn't apologize." I smiled slightly. I didn't have anything to apologize for. Saying it out loud felt strange, but not wrong. I had spent so much time trying to prove I was a good daughter that I forgot I was allowed to simply be one. Someone who could say no, someone who could ask questions, someone who didn't have to earn a place in her own family. Things became noticeably quieter after that. Not dramatic, no arguments, no angry messages, just a change. Mom stopped asking me to handle small problems. Dad stopped sending me articles about financial advice. Megan became less casual when we talked. It was like everyone was adjusting to a version of me they didn't recognize. The interesting thing was, neither did I. A week later, Thomas showed up at my apartment. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw his face. He didn't come in like he usually did. He stood at the door with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. "Sure." He sat down on the couch. For a few seconds, he just looked around. Then he finally said, "I hate asking you this." I almost laughed, because I knew that sentence. "I need help with something." There it was. The familiar opening. The same pattern, the same expectation. I didn't say anything. Thomas shifted. "It's temporary." I looked at him. "What happened?" He avoided my eyes. "Some bills came up." "What kind of bills?" "Just some things we need to cover." I waited. Normally, this was the part where I would reassure him. "Don't worry, I'll figure it out. How much do you need?" But I didn't. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Lauren? I can't help with money." His expression changed immediately. Not anger. Surprise. Like the answer wasn't supposed to be possible. "What?" I said I can't help financially. "You're serious?" "Yes." He leaned back. "But you know we're family." "I know." "Then you know we help each other." I nodded. "We do." "Then why are you saying no?" I looked at him. Because helping doesn't mean I stop asking questions. The room went quiet. For once, he didn't have an immediate response. He looked down at his hands. "I don't understand what's happened to you." I almost answered. The old me would have explained. I would have tried to make him comfortable with my feelings. Instead, I just said, "I think I'm finally paying attention." He left without arguing. And that bothered me more than if he had yelled, because silence usually meant someone was thinking. Not long after, I started organizing everything I had copied from the safe. I kept the originals where I found them. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just wanted my own record of what I had discovered. Because the one thing I had learned was that memories could be changed. Stories could be changed. But paperwork was harder to rewrite. When Thomas came by again, I had the copies sitting on the table. I wasn't hiding them. I wanted him to see them. The moment he noticed the papers, his entire expression changed. He stopped walking. His eyes moved from the documents to me, then back to the documents. Where did you get those? His voice was different. Not curious, not confused, concerned. I watched him carefully, and for the first time, I wasn't the person looking for answers. He was the one afraid of what I already knew. Thomas didn't move for several seconds. The papers were still on the table between us. What exactly did you find? His voice was quieter than usual. I pulled out the chair across from him. I found documents from the safe in Dad's office. His expression changed. You opened it? I found the key. He looked away, not angry, not surprised, just uncomfortable. That told me more than any explanation could. I wasn't looking for a reason to accuse anyone, I said. I was trying to understand why everyone suddenly decided I wasn't going on the trip. Thomas rubbed his hands together. Lauren, no, I need you to listen. He stopped. That was the first time I had ever said that to him and meant it. I placed the first document in front of him. The loan started years before I helped with the house. He looked at the paper, then another. And these payments happened around the same time I was asked for emergency help. His jaw tightened. Some of those things weren't what they look like. Then explain them. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I wasn't trying to win. I just wanted the truth. Thomas finally leaned back. Your mother didn't want you involved. I looked at him. Then why did she involve me every time she needed money? He didn't answer. Why was I old enough to help, but not old enough to know what was happening? His eyes dropped. That told me enough. A few minutes later, Mom and Dad arrived. I had called them before Thomas left. Not to create a fight, not to embarrass them. I just didn't want another conversation where everyone remembered things differently. Mom walked in and immediately noticed the papers. Her face changed. Where did you get those? The safe. She looked at Dad, just for a second. But I saw it. The same silent conversation I had seen between them so many times. I think we need to talk, I said. Nobody relaxed. Nobody reached for coffee. Nobody pretended everything was normal. I showed them the documents one by one, the old loans, the transfers, the dates, the things I had helped with because I believed there was no other option. Mom tried to explain. We were under pressure. I understand that. You don't know what it was like. You're right, I looked at her. I don't. That seemed to surprise her, because for years she assumed I would understand without being told. Dad finally spoke. We should have been more honest. I looked at him. Yes. It was the first time anyone admitted it. Mom looked down. We never wanted to hurt you. I believe that. She looked up. But that doesn't change what happened. The room went quiet, because that was the part nobody wanted to say. People can love you and still hurt you. They can struggle and still make unfair choices. They can need help and still owe you honesty. The cruise wasn't what broke me. The cabin wasn't what mattered. It was realizing my kindness had slowly become something they expected, something automatic, something they didn't have to appreciate because they assumed it would always be there. I need some space, I said. Mom looked like she wanted to respond, but she didn't, and I was grateful. I wasn't looking for the perfect apology. I just needed room to think. Things didn't magically become normal after that. There were still awkward calls, short conversations, family gatherings where everyone chose their words carefully. Megan apologized once. Not a long speech, just a quiet, I should have asked more questions. I appreciated that, but it didn't erase everything. Trust doesn't return because someone says the right thing once. It comes back through what they do afterward. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give. I helped when I wanted to, not because I was afraid of disappointing someone. A few weeks later, I went back to the house one last time. Not for answers, not for another confrontation, just to collect the last few things I had left behind. The house looked the same. The photos were still on the walls, but it didn't feel like a place I had to earn anymore. I carried the final box to my car and closed the trunk. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was choosing where I belonged. I got into the driver's seat. My phone rang. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the name, Patricia Hayes. The screen kept lighting up. My hand rested on the phone. And for a moment, I just stared at the name, deciding whether I was ready to hear what she had to say.